The war is against Christ and his people. It's not against Israel and Iran. It's not happening out there. The next thing to help us understand what's happening in 20 verses 7 through 10, and this is a little bit complex, and I parse this out a lot on the podcast. We spent probably 3 episodes really laying this out. What you have happening is in chapter 17 and 18, the beginning of chapter 19, you have this description of this harlot, this great prostitute. In 21:9 through 22:9, you have the description of the bride, Christ. And the parallels between those two accounts are really clear. In the middle of those two accounts, you have this middle section of the book of Revelation. Okay, I'm going to try to keep it simple a little bit. That middle section begins with the return of Jesus, chapter 19, verse 11 through 16. And it ends with an introduction, chapter 21, verses 1 through 8, to the descent of the New Jerusalem. And I think the way to frame that would be this. The prostitute who's ruling over the earth and causing all kinds of chaos and death and destruction is judged and destroyed. So what we expect next is that woman, that prostitute woman, to be replaced by the bride of Christ. But I think the way John's telling the story is like, well, no, actually the bride can't come yet because the enemies of God's people have to be judged. So this middle section is describing the judgment of the enemies. So the first thing that happens is Christ comes down to judge the enemies of Christ. And then you have, in the middle of this, then you have three sections kind of the judging the enemies of Christ. In chapter 19, verses 17 through 21, the beast and the false prophet are judged, and they're thrown into the lake of fire. In chapter 20, verses 1 through 10, Satan is judged, and he's thrown into the lake of fire. In chapter 20, verses 11 through 15, death and Hades are judged, and they're thrown in the lake of fire. You can tell the 3 parallel sections. What's happening then in chapter 20 then is you have this war being described that you read about. But the war happens in chapter 19 also, the description of the beast and the false prophet. They also gather to make war. And in fact, the birds eat their flesh, just like Ezekiel's description. Yeah. So you have in 19:17 through 21, a war. In 21 through 10, a war. And they're both having Ezekiel motifs, Ezekiel imagery in it. It's the same war.